Here are three of my favorite stories about graduates. We had a gentleman come into our room years ago who was CFO of a major bank. The bank was starting to fall apart, became part of Wells Fargo, and he was Hispanic, had grown up with migrant workers, and he was now finding himself looking for a career transition. He had graduated from Harvard. He was the first member of his family to get a college degree. And about halfway through the program, he told us this story that had people just riveted in their seats of what he really wanted to do with his life was to grow things. And that's all he wanted to do with his life. And then he got swept along with this educational thing and his success, and his family was so proud of him that he felt to even take a step towards that world was going to be disloyal. And I asked him a question. I said to him, so in these last few years, you've accumulated an enormous amount of knowledge about financing and business and how you make something happen. And how could you take that deep-seated desire of yours to grow things and marry that to everything that you have in your toolkit? Today, it's been many years now, today he owns a farm up in Ventura County that provides high-end vegetables and lettuces to restaurants all over the Western Seaboard. He's wealthy, and he's doing exactly what he wants. We had a gentleman come into the program a couple of years ago who was the chief human resource officer for a big company, and it was time to move on. And he came through the program. He realized that he had this deep-seated drive to become an entrepreneur, but he wanted to get one more job before he walked down that road, because he has three teenage daughters, all of them getting ready to go to college, and he was responsible. So he did that career change, the job change, and the CEO got fired. Then everyone around him was fired, and we sat down with him and said, do you think it's time to start that business? It's a year later, and he made more money with that business in his first year than he ever did as a C-level executive in a big company. I won't bore you with extra details on it, but I can say this, is when he called me to tell me how much money he made, we cried. We had this gentleman named John Morgan come into our program who was also working for this big bank that was falling apart. And he brought his wife with him. He was in his mid-50s, and on the first day he was extremely angry because he had lost his job for life. 1990 was like the big crack in the job for life thing. And second day he walked in the door, and there were maybe 100 participants that day, and he raised his hand right away, and I mentioned that he looked really different. He stood up and apologized for being so angry on the first day, and then made an announcement. And the announcement was that he'd loved and been in love with the art world his entire life. And that after doing the exercises, he'd come to the conclusion the night before that he was going to devote his life to the world of art for the rest of his life. A few years ago, I was at the gym reading the Sunday Times as I worked on the bike, and I turned the page and there was this obituary. And it said John Morgan, leader in the Los Angeles art community. And in the article, it talked about how John built an art education program that's taught in schools in difficult neighborhoods and is now run by the Getty. It talked about how he raised millions for museums in this town. And it talked about how he'd built this gallery of his own that was very successful. And I called his wife to express my condolences. And the first thing she said to me was, you know, every day that he walked out the door for work, he had this big smile on his face. And that's what this is all about for me.